So one of the things I hear a lot from my students is that they've avoided painting with oil paints because they didn't want to deal with the toxic fumes in their studio. So I want to explain to you guys today how you can actually paint in oil without any toxic fumes whatsoever. You don't even need ventilation in your studio or anything like that. Oil paints get a bad name because of all the solvents that are put into the paint. It's not the oil paint itself. Oil paint, traditional oil paint that you see in a tube, is just non-toxic linseed oil or vegetable oil, safflower oil mixed with a powder pigment, and there's no toxicity that the smell, none of that gets into the air and is toxic to breathe. Even the toxic pigments that are toxic to eat are not toxic to breathe, like lead white, for instance, is not toxic to breathe, even though you wouldn't want to consume it. But there are plenty of paints out there that are just completely have no toxins at all in them. And those traditional oil paints, any traditional oil paint as a matter of fact, in the tube is just powdered pigment mixed with vegetable oil, so with no toxicity. The toxicity comes in adding solvents to the paint, or thinning your paint down with solvents, or a medium that has solvents in it, or a medium that has not only solvents but also dryers, things that speed up the drying. Those things are toxic to breathe. And there are some tube paints, like the Griffin paint from Winsor Newton, that's they put dryers in the tube itself. So even though it looks like traditional oil paint, it's nothing like traditional oil paint. It has solvents in it, and it has a big warning on the back that you're not supposed to breathe the fumes. But I'm talking about just regular old traditional oil paint. The Geneva paint that we make here in Austin, for instance, has no fumes in it whatsoever. It's the mediums that you mix into it. So how do you go about mixing or painting if you need the mediums? Well, what you can do is you can just use straight linseed oil or walnut oil or any other drying oils like safflower oil, poppy seed oil, and you just use that as your medium. Now, if you need to put a foundation on your canvas, like a stain, or you want to just put a foundation layer underneath that, now that's going to have to be mixed with solvents. You're not going to be able to create a foundation layer that's lean enough, meaning that has, it can't have too much oil in it, because the layers that go on top have to have more oil, a higher oil percentage than the layers on the bottom. And so if you want a nice, smooth stain that's really nice and dry, and it makes a good foundation, you have to mix mineral spirits into that. You could also use turpentine, but that's something you can do outside. You can do it in an open garage. You can do it just outdoors on a nice day. If you're living in a climate where it's just impossible to out in the snow or something, and you don't have a place to do it out in the open, you can like I said, do it in an open garage or in a room that's got really good ventilation. Now, as far as the solvents that artists use, there's a lot of different brands of medium out there. The vast majority of those mediums have a dryer in them, which adds to the toxicity, as well as the solvent that's in there. The old-fashioned turpentine is something that you definitely should try to avoid. The mineral spirits has largely replaced turpentine in the artist's studio, just because turpentine is so toxic. I mean, there are people that have used turpentine for their whole career, and they slur their speech because they literally have killed enough brain cells using it. So it's something, so that's why to avoid turpentine. But even like mineral spirits or any of the other solvents, it's just not a good idea to be breathing that all the time. So on the back of the label of every one of these products, they'll tell you use with adequate ventilation, but very few people do. So I would do all the things that require solvent outdoors or in an open garage, things that have mineral spirits in it, or anything else. But for your main paint, your oil paint, you can just mix in walnut oil or linseed oil or safflower oil, and there's nothing toxic about that. Now, you wouldn't want to use too much oil. So in other words, you wouldn't want to mix in so much oil with just a little bit of paint where it's just real runny, because now you're just basically painting with oil, and without that pigment binder in there, it's going to form a very weak paint film. So, the Geneva paint that we make here in Austin, Texas, which is my company, You know, we have an incredibly high pigment load in our paint because the pigment itself is the binder. We also put an additive in there that makes the paint have a strong, you know, forms a strong paint film. But our paint has no solvents in it. It has no toxic fumes. So if you want to just use our Geneva paint, you don't even have to mix medium into it. But if you're using another brand of paint, you know, whether it's Winsor Newton or whether it's, you know, Gamblin or anybody else, you can just mix a little bit of walnut oil or linseed oil or any other drying oil into it and just use that as your medium without the solvent. But that has to be a top layer. It cannot be a bottom layer because then you could get cracking. So as long as it's a top layer and you're not using too much oil, you're going to be fine. So that's how you can paint without using any fumes. You know, you just do all the things that require solvent outdoors and then just keep the oil paint with only the oil and you won't have any fumes at all. So I hope that's helpful. Thanks you guys for watching and we'll see you in the next one.